She was in my passenger seat for 40 seconds before she said it. I'd collected her from the curb outside the venue, the way you collect someone who has had slightly too much champagne at a family wedding and whose pride has limits, carefully, without commentary, with the engine running and the door already open. She'd gotten in without looking at me. She'd put her seatbelt on. She'd sat for a moment with her eyes closed and her head tipped back against the headrest, her silver earrings catching the light from the venue sign above us, and I had been about to pull out into the road when she said, quietly but clearly, "Don't take me to her house. Take me to yours." I kept my hands on the wheel. I looked straight ahead at the road. Her house was my brother's house. She'd lived there for 8 months, since the separation. The her in the sentence was my brother's new girlfriend, who had moved in 3 weeks ago, which was a fact I had learned from my mother and not from my brother, and which was the reason Nadia had been drinking champagne at a family wedding, with the specific focus of someone who was trying to feel something other than what she was feeling. I understood all of that. I understood the "don't take me there." What I was less prepared for was the "take me to yours." I said, "Nadia." She didn't open her eyes. "Please," she said. Just that. I pulled out into the road. I drove north instead of south, and that was the beginning of the longest and most honest conversation we had ever had, at 11:30 at night, in a car that smelled of her perfume, and the cold coming in from the window I'd cracked because she'd asked for air, with her silver earrings catching the lights of every passing street lamp all the way home. My name is Joel Mara. I'm 35. I'm an architect, residential. Mostly I spend my days thinking about how spaces make people feel, which sounds more profound than it is, and less practical than it is. I live in a 1-bedroom flat that I redesigned myself 3 years ago, which means I have very specific opinions about light and storage, and absolutely nothing on the walls that I don't mean. I've been close to my brother Daniel since we were children. We are different in the ways brothers are often different. He is louder, more instinctive, moves through rooms like he's already decided what happens next. I am more careful. I take longer to arrive at things. We have always understood each other anyway, which is the part that matters. Her name was Nadia Osai. 32. She'd married my brother 6 years ago in a small ceremony in the city, and I had been best man, and I had given a speech that she'd told me afterward was the only wedding speech she'd ever heard that made her genuinely cry, which I had filed under compliments to revisit privately. She was a secondary school art teacher. She was the kind of person who noticed things, the particular quality of afternoon light, the way a room changed when someone left it, the specific silence that followed a good piece of music. She laughed easily and argued carefully and had a patience with other people that I had always privately considered one of the rarest things about her. She wore small silver earrings, almost always the same pair, simple drops, undemonstrative, the kind of thing you stop seeing after a while because they've become part of the picture. I noticed them the night I drove her home because they were the only thing catching light in the dark of the car, and I had to look somewhere that wasn't her face. The marriage had ended 14 months ago. Not loudly. The loud version would almost have been easier. There was no dramatic rupture, no single event, just a long, slow accumulation of distance between two people who had stopped finding their way back to each other. My brother had told me about it in a phone call where he sounded more tired than sad, which was, I thought, the saddest version of it. I had called Nadia 3 days later. That was a choice I made deliberately, and I had thought about it before I made it, because she was my brother's wife, was at that point still, and because my loyalty was not uncomplicated, and because I was not certain, calling her, exactly what I was doing. She'd answered on the second ring and said, "I wondered if you'd call." I said I would. I said, People say things. I know, I said. I called. We had talked for an hour. That was the first time. After that, we talked every 2 or 3 weeks, carefully, at a distance that we had never named but both understood. She was still in the family in the ways that mattered. She came to my mother's birthday lunch. She texted me when she saw a building in the city I would appreciate. She sent a photo once of a secondary school student's painting and said this kid is going to be something. No other context required. I had been managing what I felt about Nadia Osai for a long time. I had become expert at it. The wedding was the first occasion in 8 months where we had been in the same room for more than 2 hours, and I had been doing well, until she'd had too much champagne and someone had told her about the new girlfriend, and she'd sat down in the corner chair with a very particular expression and stopped talking to anyone. I had gotten up. I had offered to drive her. She had said yes without argument, which told me more than any sentence would have. She didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes of the drive. I didn't push. I drove. The city moved past the windows, wet streets, late-night amber, the occasional taxi. She had her hands folded in her lap and her eyes open now, watching the lights go by, and I could hear her breathing slow from the shallow rhythm of someone trying to hold themselves together into something more deliberate. "When did you find out?" she said finally. "About the girlfriend." "3 weeks ago. Mum told me." She nodded once. He didn't tell me either. A pause. I don't know why I'm surprised. He was never good at the things that were hard to say. I didn't respond to that. It was true, and she knew it, and she didn't need me to confirm it. "I'm not still in love with him," she said. "I want you to know that. I know how this looks, with the champagne and the I'm not. It's just the house. Living in someone else's life when they've already started the next version of theirs." She turned to look at me for the first time. "Do you understand that?" "Yes," I said. "I just couldn't go back there tonight." "I know." She turned back to the window. She was quiet for a moment. "You're very calm," she said. "You've always been very calm about me." I kept my eyes on the road. "You're not a difficult person to be calm around," I said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Joel, yeah, thank you for coming to get me." "You called," I said. "I came." She looked at me again, and I did not look back. Because I was driving, and it was 11:30 at night, and the lights were wet on the road, and I needed to maintain structural integrity for approximately another 8 minutes. The flat was dark when we arrived. I turned on the kitchen light, the low one, the one over the counter, because overhead light at that hour felt too much like an accusation. She'd been here a handful of times before, for dinners when she and Daniel were still together, and she moved through the space with the ease of someone who remembers a room. She sat at the kitchen table. I made tea, because that is what you do, and because it gave me something to do with my hands. She'd taken her heels off at the door and was holding one of them by the strap, turning it slowly, not looking at it, just holding it. The silver earrings still on. "Can I ask you something?" She said. "Yes, that speech. At the wedding. You wrote it yourself?" "Yes, there was a line in it." She set the heel down. "You said, she is the kind of person who makes a room more honest just by being in it. I've thought about that a lot. I never asked you what you meant by it. I brought the tea to the table. I sat down across from her. I meant it exactly as it sounds," I said. She looked at the cup. "That's a generous thing to say about someone." "It's an accurate thing," I said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me, and her expression did something I had not seen it do before. All the composure it usually held quietly releasing, the way a room changes when you open a window. "I used to think," she said, carefully, that the reason I liked talking to you was because you were Daniel's brother, that it was just proximity, familiarity. I told myself that for a long time. I didn't say anything. I waited. And then the marriage ended, she said, and you called. And I kept waiting for that to be the thing that changed, for the calls to stop, or to feel different, or to run out of things to be. And they didn't. She looked at her hands. You're the person I call when something is good, and when something is bad. And I've been calling that friendship for 14 months, and I think I might have been imprecise about it. Something in the room shifted. The low light, the cooling tea, her earrings. I was quiet for a moment. I was being careful in the way I am always careful, but underneath the careful was the thing I had been managing for a long time, and it had run out of room. Nadia, I said, I need to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly, because you've had champagne, and it matters that this lands correctly. She looked at me. You can sleep in my room tonight, and I'll take the sofa. And in the morning we can have breakfast, and I'll drive you wherever you need to go. And nothing about tonight has to be anything other than me coming to get you, because you needed someone to come. I held her look. That is a genuine option. I want you to know it exists. She was very still. Is that what you want? She asked. No, I said, but I want you to want something real, not something that feels safer than the thing you went back to tonight. She looked at me for a long moment. The tea was steaming quietly between us. I've been imprecise, she said again, for 14 months. That's not champagne. That's a year and 2 months of calling something the wrong name because the right name was complicated. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I'm telling you now because I'm tired of the wrong name. Her hand was very still on mine. I looked at it. I thought about the wedding speech, and the phone call I'd made 3 days after the separation, and every conversation we'd had in the careful distance between then and now, and the specific quality of the way she'd said, take me to yours, not desperate, not impulsive, just honest. The most honest sentence of the evening, said quietly in the dark of a car by a woman who notices things, and had at some point noticed this. I turned my hand over and held hers. The calls were never just familiar, I said. Not for me. Not from the first one. She let out a slow breath. The composed thing in her face softened completely, not into sadness, not into relief exactly, just into something truer than what had been there before. You should have said something, she said. You were my brother's wife. And now? Now, I said. You're asking me. She looked at me across the table with the low light between us, and she smiled. Small, real, the kind that arrives when something long held becomes allowed. And she said, I'm asking you. I brought her hand up and held it properly. She let me. Outside, the city did what cities do at midnight, went on being itself, indifferent and bright. And in the kitchen the tea cooled, and the low light held, and nothing about it was loud or sudden. It was simply 2 people arriving, finally, at the same place at the same time. Her earrings caught the light. 3 months later, she found a flat of her own. 2 rooms. Good light from the east windows. A wall she painted herself in the specific terracotta she'd wanted since she was 24. She called me before she signed the lease and described every room in detail, which is what she does when she's decided something and wants to share the deciding. I went over the day she moved in. I brought food, and she had no plates unpacked yet, and we ate on the floor of the living room while she told me what she was going to do with each wall. I listened the way I listened to sites before I designed them, trying to understand what the space wanted to become. She noticed me doing it. She said, "You're treating my flat like a client brief." I said, "I'm trying to understand what you want it to feel like." She said, "Safe. And mine. And like there's room for the future in it." I said I thought she'd managed that already. She handed me the last of the bread and leaned her shoulder against mine and stayed there. Which is, I have come to understand, how she shows the things she doesn't say aloud. I have learned to read that. I am learning to read a lot of things. A year later, when people ask how we got together, I tell them the drive. I tell them she said one sentence in the dark of a car at 11:30 at night, and I drove north instead of south. And that was all. She tells them I gave her an exit door before anything had even started. And she understood, then, that she was safe. She kept the earrings. She wears them still, the same small silver drops, at dinner, at school, on Sunday mornings in the flat with the terracotta wall and the east light coming in. I notice them every time. I don't think I'll ever stop. What would you have done if someone you'd been careful about for a long time finally said the true thing? In the dark, quietly, after a night that hadn't gone to plan. And have you ever been the one who had to decide, in a single moment, whether to take the safe road or the honest one, knowing both were real and only one was right? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one landed for you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.